While Dad was fighting for his life in surgery, my brother drained $870,000 from our family account. Then the bank called, and everything changed. My name is Isabella Reeves. I'm 31. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Mercy General Hospital's waiting room buzzed like angry wasps above my head. I'd been sitting in the same uncomfortable plastic chair for 14 hours, watching the clock tick past midnight as my father fought through what the doctors called the most critical surgery of his life. Mom had finally gone home to shower and change clothes, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a lukewarm cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Dad's heart attack had come out of nowhere. One minute he was laughing at dinner, telling us about his latest real estate deal, and the next, he was clutching his chest, gasping for air on our kitchen floor. The paramedics said we were lucky we called when we did. Every minute counted with cases like his. I remember thinking, as I watched them wheel him into the operating room, that this was it. This was the moment that would either bring our family closer together or tear us apart completely. I had no idea how right I was going to be, just not in the way I expected. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the night. Updates from relatives, concerned friends, my boss telling me to take all the time I needed. But when it rang at 2:47 a.m. with an unknown number, something in my gut told me to answer. Is this Isabella Reeves? The voice was professional, clipped, urgent. Yes, who is this? This is Marcus Chen from First National Bank's fraud department. We need to speak with you immediately about suspicious activity on your father's business account. The words hit me like ice water. What kind of suspicious activity? My father is in surgery right now, he can't. Ma'am, we're showing a series of large withdrawals totaling $870,000 that began approximately 6 hours ago. The transactions were authorized using legitimate access codes, but the timing and amounts have triggered our security protocols. I felt the blood drain from my face. Dad's business account. The one that held the proceeds from his latest commercial property sale. The one that only 3 people had access to, Dad, myself as his business partner, and my brother Derek as the company's financial manager. I didn't authorize any withdrawals, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hospital's ambient noise. We understand, Miss Reeves. That's why we're calling. Can you confirm your whereabouts for the past 12 hours? I've been at Mercy General Hospital. My father had a heart attack. I haven't left this waiting room since 2 p.m. yesterday. There was a pause. And Derek Reeves? Is he family? My stomach dropped. He's my brother. He should be here. He said he was coming after he handled some urgent business matters. Another pause. Longer this time. Miss Reeves, I think you need to come in first thing in the morning. And you might want to bring a lawyer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the harsh hospital lighting. Around me, the world continued as if nothing had changed. Nurses walked their rounds, machines beeped steadily, the cleaning crew pushed their carts down empty hallways. But for me, everything had shifted. Derek. My younger brother, the one who'd always been Dad's favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong. The one who'd convinced Dad to give him financial oversight of the company, to take some pressure off the old man. The same Derek who'd hugged me just hours ago in this very waiting room, promising he'd be back before Dad got out of surgery. I tried calling him. Straight to voicemail. I tried texting. No response. I tried calling his apartment, his girlfriend, even his best friend from college. Nothing. That's when I knew. In that moment, sitting in a hospital chair while my father fought for his life 3 floors above me, I realized that the brother I'd trusted, the family member I'd defended countless times over the years, had just stolen nearly $1 million from our dying father. But here's what Derek didn't know about me. Here's what none of them knew. I wasn't just Dad's business partner by title. I was a forensic accountant by training, with a specialty in financial fraud investigation. I'd spent 7 years working for the district attorney's office before joining Dad's real estate company. I knew how money moved, how it hid, and most importantly, how to track it. Derek thought he was stealing from a helpless old man whose daughter was too distracted by medical drama to notice. What he'd actually done was commit federal wire fraud against someone who'd built her entire career on catching people exactly like him. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Dad lay unconscious, fighting for every heartbeat, his own son was systematically draining the life's work that was supposed to secure our family's future. But Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated exactly who he was stealing from. I looked up at the ceiling, toward the operating room where Dad was still fighting, and made a silent promise. "Don't worry, Dad. I've got this. I've got all of this." Because this wasn't just about money. This was about family, trust, and the kind of betrayal that changes everything. And Derek was about to learn that some people are very dangerous when they're quiet. The surgery was just the beginning. The real operation was about to start, and this time, I was going to be the one in control. The call from Dr. Martinez came at 6:23 a.m. "Isabella, your father made it through surgery. He's stable, but we need to keep him sedated for the next 48 hours. His heart needs time to heal." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by the crushing weight of what I now had to face. Dad was alive, but while he'd been fighting for his life, his own son had been systematically destroying everything he'd worked for. I was gathering my things to head to the bank when Derek finally showed up. He walked into the waiting room like he owned it, designer coffee in hand, looking completely refreshed. Not like someone who'd spent the night worried sick about his father. "Izzy," he called out, using the childhood nickname that suddenly felt like sandpaper. "How's Dad? I'm so sorry I'm late. Had to handle some emergency client calls." His smile was practiced, perfect, the same one he'd used to charm his way out of trouble our entire lives. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I wanted to see how far he'd go with the lie. "Conference call with those investors from Seattle. You know how Dad always says business doesn't stop for anything." He sat down beside me, all concerned brother energy. "The surgery went well though, right? He's going to be okay?" "He's stable." I watched Derek's face carefully. "Derek, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. Anything." First National called me a few hours ago. They're showing some unusual activity on Dad's business account. Large withdrawals. Do you know anything about that?" For just a split second, something flickered across his face. Fear? Calculation? But then the mask slipped back into place so smoothly I almost missed it. "Withdrawals? That's weird. Maybe Dad moved some money around before the heart attack and forgot to mention it. You know how he's been lately, kind of scattered." Derek pulled out his phone, frowning with fake concern. "I can call the bank if you want. Clear this up." The audacity was breathtaking. Not only had he stolen the money, but he was now gaslighting our father's mental state to cover for it. Dad, who could remember every detail of every real estate deal he'd ever made, was supposedly scattered. "That's okay," I said evenly. "I'm heading there myself in a few minutes. They want to see me in person." Derek's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on his coffee cup. "Oh. Well, I should probably come with you then. Since I'm the financial manager and all." "Actually, Derek, I think you should stay here. In case Dad wakes up early." I stood, slinging my purse over my shoulder. Family should be here for him. Right. Of course. But his eyes were nervous now, darting around like he was calculating escape routes. "Izzy, whatever this is about, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Banks make mistakes all the time." "I'm sure you're right." I headed toward the elevator, then turned back as if I'd just remembered something. "Oh, Derek? The bank mentioned they have security footage of all the transactions. Isn't technology amazing these days? The color drained from his face. Security footage? Hum. Every ATM, every branch visit, every wire transfer. They record everything now. I smiled, the same sweet smile I'd perfected over years of family dinners. Nothing to worry about though, right? Since you didn't make any withdrawals. I watched him swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing lure. Right. No, I haven't been to the bank in weeks. Good. Then we should have this cleared up in no time. The elevator doors closed between us, but not before I saw Derek pull out his phone with shaking hands. Probably calling his lawyer, or maybe his girlfriend, or maybe just trying to figure out how much trouble he was in. But here's what Derek didn't understand yet. This wasn't going to be like all the other times he'd charmed his way out of consequences. This wasn't like when he'd crashed Dad's car in high school and convinced everyone it was an accident. This wasn't like when he'd borrowed money from Mom's jewelry fund for his college girlfriend and paid it back just before she noticed. This was federal wire fraud. This was theft from a hospitalized man. This was nearly $1 million that represented not just money, but Dad's entire legacy, his retirement, the medical bills that were about to come, and the security our family had spent decades building. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, I felt something shift inside me. The same feeling I used to get when I was closing in on a particularly complex fraud case at the DA's office. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of watching a carefully constructed lie fall apart piece by piece. Derek thought he was dealing with his pushover sister, the one who'd always covered for him, who'd always smoothed things over with Mom and Dad when his schemes went wrong. He thought I'd find some way to minimize this, to protect the family reputation, to keep the peace like I always had. He was about to learn that the sister who'd bailed him out countless times was gone. In her place was a forensic accountant with 7 years of experience putting people like him in prison. The parking garage was cold and echoing, but I felt warm for the first time since Dad's heart attack. Because now I had a purpose beyond just worrying and waiting. I had a thief to catch. And he'd just made the mistake of stealing from the wrong family. The drive to First National took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind kept cycling through the same thoughts. How long had Derek been planning this? How much more money was missing that the bank hadn't caught yet? And the question that hurt the most, how could I have been so blind? I'd always known Derek was irresponsible with money. Throughout college, he'd call Dad for emergency funds that somehow always coincided with spring break trips or new gaming systems. After graduation, when Dad brought him into the business, I'd noticed discrepancies in petty cash, small amounts that Derek always explained away with receipts that seemed just a little too convenient. But I'd made excuses for him. Family loyalty, I told myself. Everyone deserves a second chance. Derek was young, he was learning, he just needed guidance. I'd been the one to convince Dad to give him financial oversight, arguing that it would help him mature, give him real responsibility. The memory made my stomach turn. 6 months ago, Derek had come to me with a proposal. Izzy, Dad's getting older. He shouldn't be handling all the financial stress alone. What if we restructured things so I could take on more of the day-to-day money management? He'd had spreadsheets, projections, a whole presentation about efficiency and delegation. I'd thought it was admirable. My little brother, finally stepping up, wanting to help carry the load. I'd been the one to present it to Dad, to vouch for Derek's responsibility and dedication. Dad had been hesitant, he'd always kept tight control over the finances, but he trusted my judgment. If Izzy thinks you're ready, then I trust her assessment, Dad had said, signing over the account access with a smile. Just promise me you'll consult with your sister on any major decisions. Derek had promised. Shook Dad's hand, hugged me, told us both how much this meant to him. How he wouldn't let us down. The betrayal ran deeper than just the money. He'd used my reputation, my relationship with Dad, my trust to gain access to everything he'd just stolen. I wasn't just a victim, I was an unwitting accomplice. Marcus Chen met me in the bank's lobby, a serious man in his 50s with tired eyes that had probably seen every type of financial crime imaginable. "Miss Reeves, thank you for coming in so quickly. I'm sorry about your father's condition." "Thank you. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" He led me to a small conference room and spread out a series of printouts. "The withdrawals began at 3:17 p.m. yesterday, approximately 1 hour after your father was admitted to the hospital. Someone accessed the account using legitimate credentials and began a series of wire transfers." I stared at the timeline. Derek had hugged me in the hospital waiting room at 2:45 p.m., told me he needed to handle some urgent business matters, and promised to be back before Dad got out of surgery. By 3:17, he was already at a computer, moving our father's money. "The transfers went to 3 different accounts," Marcus continued. 2 domestic accounts, one in Nevada, one in Delaware, and one offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Very sophisticated for someone acting impulsively. Sophisticated how? The domestic accounts were opened within the last 60 days using shell companies. The Delaware account was registered to something called Mountain Vista Holdings, the Nevada account to Pacific Sunrise Investments. Both companies list the same registered agent, a service in Miami that specializes in anonymous corporate setups. My blood ran cold. Derek hadn't just stolen the money on impulse after Dad's heart attack. He'd been planning this for months. Setting up shell companies, opening accounts, creating an infrastructure to move and hide stolen funds. This wasn't a moment of weakness or desperation, it was premeditated fraud. "The offshore transfer is particularly concerning," Marcus continued. "Once money reaches certain international accounts, recovery becomes complicated. The Cayman account received $400,000 of the total." "What about the security footage you mentioned?" Marcus turned his laptop toward me. "We have comprehensive surveillance. Here's your brother at the downtown branch yesterday at 3:22 p.m. The video was crystal clear. Derek, wearing the same blue button-down shirt he'd had on at the hospital, sitting at one of the bank's customer service terminals. His face was calm, focused, showing none of the grief or worry you'd expect from someone whose father had just had a heart attack. He looked like a man conducting routine business. "He used the terminal for 47 minutes, Marcus said. Multiple transactions, all properly authenticated with his access codes. From a technical standpoint, everything was legitimate. But the timing and amounts triggered our fraud algorithms." I watched Derek on the screen, methodically destroying our family's financial security while Dad lay unconscious 3 miles away. The clinical precision of it was almost worse than if he'd acted in emotional desperation. This was calculated. Cold. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "Our investigation shows this account has had unusual activity for the past several months. Smaller amounts, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always just under the thresholds that would trigger automatic reviews." "How much total?" "Over the past 6 months, approximately $180,000 in irregular withdrawals that don't correspond to any legitimate business expenses in your father's records." The room felt like it was spinning. Derek hadn't just stolen $870,000 yesterday. He'd been systematically embezzling from Dad for half a year. While I'd been proud of his maturation and growing responsibility, he'd been treating our father's life savings like his personal ATM. "Miss Reeves, I need to ask you directly, did you have any knowledge of or involvement in these transactions?" "None whatsoever. I was at the hospital from 2 p.m. yesterday until this morning. I can provide you with security footage from there, witness statements from medical staff, phone records showing I never left the building." Marcus nodded. "We'll need all of that for our investigation. Miss Reeves, given your background in forensic accounting, I assume you understand the severity of what we're dealing with here. Federal wire fraud, theft from an elderly victim, structuring to avoid reporting requirements, money laundering through shell corporations." I ticked off the charges mechanically. Derek's looking at decades in federal prison if convicted on all counts. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit will want to interview you later today. They'll need a complete timeline of your brother's access to the accounts, any suspicious behavior you might have noticed, details about his lifestyle that might indicate unexplained income." Unexplained income. Derek's new car, the expensive apartment he'd moved into last month, the designer clothes, the frequent trips. I'd assumed he was just finally being responsible with his salary, maybe making some smart investments. The truth was so much worse. As I sat in that sterile conference room, surrounded by evidence of my brother's betrayal, I felt something crystallizing inside me. Not just anger or hurt, though those were there. Something colder and more focused. Derek had spent months planning this theft. He'd used my trust and reputation as cover. He'd stolen not just from Dad, but from our entire family's future. And he'd done it all while Dad was fighting for his life. If Derek wanted to play a long game, I was about to show him what a real long game looked like. Because unlike his amateur hour shell companies and obvious money trails, I knew how to build a case that would stand up in federal court. Derek thought he was the smart one, the one who'd finally outsmarted his goody-two-shoes sister and his trusting father. He was about to learn that intelligence and cunning aren't the same thing. And I had both. The FBI field office in downtown was exactly what you'd expect from a federal building, all concrete and bulletproof glass, designed to intimidate. Special Agent Sarah Martinez met me in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who reminded me of the prosecutors I used to work with at the DA's office. Professional, no nonsense, and completely focused on facts. Miss Reeves, I understand this is a difficult situation. Family financial crimes are always complex emotionally, but I need you to put that aside and think like the forensic accountant you are. We sat in an interview room that could have been copied from any police procedural show. Gray walls, metal table, recording equipment, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look guilty. Agent Martinez spread Derek's financial records across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Before we discuss your brother's activities, I need to understand your role in the business and your relationship with him. I took a breath, organizing my thoughts the way I used to before testifying in court. Derek is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, he was always the charming one, the one who could talk his way out of trouble. Our parents, especially Dad, saw his charisma as leadership potential. And professionally? I joined Dad's real estate company 7 years ago after working fraud investigation for the district attorney. Derek came on board 2 years later, initially in sales. 6 months ago, I recommended him for financial oversight. The words tasted bitter. That recommendation was based on his apparent maturity and his business degree, not on any real vetting of his character. Agent Martinez made notes. Walk me through how the account access was structured. Dad maintained primary control, but Derek and I both had full authorization for business purposes. The account typically held between $200,000 and $1.2 million, depending on where we were in property acquisition and sales cycles. The recent balance was high because we just closed on a commercial property sale. And you noticed no irregularities in the months leading up to yesterday's theft? This was the question I'd been dreading. As a forensic accountant, I should have caught the pattern of smaller thefts. It was exactly the kind of structuring scheme I'd prosecuted dozens of times. I reviewed monthly statements, but I wasn't doing daily reconciliation. Derek handled the day-to-day financial operations, and I trusted his summaries. I paused, forcing myself to be completely honest. In retrospect, there were warning signs I should have caught. Such as? Derek's lifestyle upgraded significantly over the past 6 months. New car, expensive apartment, designer clothes, frequent travel. When I asked about it, he claimed he was doing well with side investments and had gotten a raise from Dad. Agent Martinez pulled out a different set of documents. These are Derek's personal banking records. Over the past 6 months, he made cash deposits totaling $174,000. The deposits were always just under $10,000, classic structuring to avoid reporting requirements. The evidence was damning and professionally embarrassing. I'd been living with a criminal who was using textbook money laundering techniques, and I'd missed it completely because of family loyalty and willful blindness. Miss Reeves, I need to ask this directly. At any point, did you suspect your brother was stealing from your father? No. If I had suspected anything, would have investigated immediately and reported it. My professional reputation and ethics wouldn't allow me to ignore financial crimes, regardless of family relationships. But you did notice behavioral changes? I thought back to the past few months, trying to separate my emotions from observable facts. Derek became more secretive about his work. He used to discuss deals and transactions openly, but recently he'd been vague about his daily activities. He also started working unusual hours, claiming client meetings that required him to be out of the office for extended periods. Did he ever ask about your father's health or financial planning? The question hit like a physical blow. 3 weeks ago, Derek asked me about Dad's estate planning. He wanted to know about succession plans for the business, what would happen to accounts if Dad became incapacitated, whether there were any safeguards in place for medical emergencies. Agent Martinez's pen stopped moving. How did you respond? I told him Dad had a will and medical power of attorney documents, but that I wasn't privy to all the details. Derek seemed concerned about family financial security if something happened to Dad. I felt sick. I thought he was being responsible, thinking ahead about family welfare. He was thinking ahead, Agent Martinez said grimly. Just not in the way you assumed. She pulled out hospital security footage on her laptop. This is from Mercy General yesterday. Your brother arrives at 2:43 p.m., stays for approximately 12 minutes, then leaves. Bank security shows him at the downtown branch at 3:22 p.m. Watching the footage was surreal. Derek hugging me in the waiting room, his face a perfect mask of concern and grief. Then, less than an hour later, sitting calmly at a bank terminal, systematically stealing from our unconscious father. The timing suggests he may have been waiting for an opportunity like your father's medical emergency, Agent Martinez continued. The shell companies were established 2 months ago. The offshore account was opened 6 weeks ago. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned. You think he was waiting for Dad to be incapacitated? I think he was prepared to move quickly when the right circumstances presented themselves. Your father's heart attack gave him the perfect cover, family focused on medical crisis, emotions running high, normal oversight disrupted. The calculated nature of it was breathtaking. Derek hadn't just stolen money, he'd been waiting for our father to be vulnerable, possibly even hoping for it. While I'd been worried about Dad's health and stress levels, Derek had been positioning himself to exploit any medical emergency. What happens now? I asked. We're issuing federal warrants for wire fraud, money laundering, and theft from an elderly victim. The Cayman account has been frozen pending international cooperation agreements. The domestic accounts are already secured. And recovery of the funds? Agent Martinez's expression was carefully neutral. Some of the domestic money is recoverable. The offshore funds, that's more complicated. Your brother was sophisticated enough to use a jurisdiction with strong banking privacy laws. The implications were devastating. Even if Derek was caught and convicted, hundreds of thousands of dollars might be permanently lost. Money that Dad would need for medical expenses, for retirement, for the basic security he'd spent his life building. Miss Reeves, I need you to understand something. This case is going forward regardless of your cooperation, but your testimony will be crucial for conviction on all charges. You'll need to testify about the business structure, the account access, your brother's behavior, and your professional assessment of the financial crimes. You want me to testify against my brother. I want you to testify about facts and evidence. The personal relationship is secondary to the legal reality of what happened here. I sat in that sterile interview room, federal building humming around me, and felt the last pieces of my family loyalty crumble. Derek hadn't just stolen money, he destroyed trust, betrayed our father's vulnerability, and forced me into a position where I had to choose between family harmony and justice. But really, Derek had made that choice for me when he decided to commit federal crimes using access I'd helped him obtain. The brother I'd protected and defended my entire life was gone, replaced by a criminal who'd been planning to exploit our family's crises. I'll testify, I said quietly. I'll provide whatever evidence and expertise you need for conviction. Agent Martinez nodded. We'll need you to maintain normal contact with Derek until we execute the arrest warrant. Don't let him know we've spoken or that you're aware of the investigation. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of Derek manipulating and deceiving our family, I was about to become the one keeping secrets. But unlike his deception, mine served justice rather than greed. Derek thought he'd committed the perfect crime, exploiting a family tragedy while his sister was distracted by grief and worry. He was about to learn that some people are most dangerous when they're underestimated. And I'd been underestimated my entire life. The drive back to the hospital gave me time to process what I'd learned and plan my next moves. Derek had stolen nearly $1 million, but more than that, he'd shattered something fundamental about our family that could never be repaired. The brother I defended, covered for, and vouched for my entire life was a calculating criminal who'd been waiting for our father's vulnerability to strike. When I walked back into the ICU waiting area, Derek was exactly where I'd left him, scrolling through his phone with the casual air of someone without a care in the world. He looked up as I approached, and I had to consciously control my expression to hide what I now knew. "How did it go at the bank?" he asked, his voice pitched perfectly between concern and curiosity. Was it just a computer glitch like I thought? Looking at him now, I could see the performance for what it was. The slightly furrowed brow, the careful modulation of his voice, the way he leaned forward just enough to seem engaged but not anxious. Derek had always been good at reading people and giving them what they expected to see. "Actually, it's more complicated than that," I said, settling into the chair beside him. "There were significant withdrawals made yesterday afternoon. The bank is treating it as potential fraud." Derek's face went through a micro-expression of panic before settling back into concerned confusion. "Fraud? That's crazy. Who would have access to Dad's accounts?" The casual way he threw Dad under the bus, suggesting our hospitalized father might have made the transfers himself, was almost more infuriating than the theft itself. But I kept my voice level, professional. "The bank is investigating. They'll need to interview anyone with account access." I watched Derek's hands, noticed how he gripped his phone a little tighter. "That includes both of us, since we're the only other people with authorization." "Of course, whatever they need." Derek's voice was steady, but I caught him swallowing hard. "I'm sure it's just some kind of mistake. Maybe Dad moved money around before the heart attack and forgot to mention it." There it was again, the suggestion that Dad was mentally declining, that our sharp, meticulous father had somehow forgotten moving nearly $1 million. Derek was already building his defense, creating doubt about Dad's mental state to provide cover for his crimes. "The bank mentioned they have comprehensive security footage of all transactions," I said casually, pulling out my own phone as if checking messages. "Every branch visit, every terminal session. Amazing how detailed their surveillance is these days." Derek went very still. "Security footage? They can track exactly when and where every transaction was made, who authorized it, even what the person was wearing." I looked up from my phone, meeting his eyes directly. "They're reviewing all of it as part of the investigation." The color drained from Derek's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Well, that should clear everything up then." "Prove it wasn't." "I mean, it'll show what really happened." "Absolutely. The footage will show exactly what happened and who was responsible." I stood up, stretching as if I'd been sitting too long. "Derek, can I ask you something?" "Sure, anything." "Yesterday, after you left here to handle those client calls, you were gone for quite a while. What time did you get back?" Derek's eyes darted away from mine, looking toward the nurse's station. It was later than I expected. Those Seattle investors had a lot of questions. You know how these conference calls can drag on." "Of course." "What time though?" "I was here all night and I don't remember seeing you come back." Well, I got back pretty late." "You might have been sleeping." "I didn't want to wake you, so I just sat quietly in the corner." His voice was getting higher, more strained. "Then I went home for a quick shower this morning before coming back." Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. I'd been awake all night, alert to every sound, every movement in the waiting area. Derek hadn't returned to the hospital after leaving at 2:45 p.m. yesterday. He'd been too busy moving stolen money through shell companies and offshore accounts. That's strange, I said thoughtfully. Because I was awake most of the night. I would have noticed if you came back. Derek's hand went to his neck, rubbing it nervously. Maybe you dozed off and didn't realize. It was such a stressful day, and you'd been here so long. I nodded slowly, as if accepting his explanation, but I could see the sweat forming on his forehead despite the hospital's air conditioning. Derek was realizing that his alibi was falling apart, that his carefully constructed lies were unraveling. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez, warrant approved. Arrest scheduled for tomorrow morning. Maintain normal contact until then. I should check on Dad, I said, standing up. The nurses said they might reduce his sedation this afternoon. Good idea. I'll come with you. Actually, only one visitor at a time in the ICU. Why don't you stay here in case the doctor comes by with updates? Derek nodded, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He didn't want to face Dad, even unconscious. Guilt? Fear? Or just the practical concern that being near his victim might somehow expose his crimes? I walked toward the ICU, but instead of going to Dad's room, I found a quiet alcove near the elevators and called my lawyer, Patricia Valdez. We'd worked together during my time at the DA's office, and she'd since moved into private practice specializing in white-collar crime. Isabella, I heard about your father. How is he? Stable, thank you. Pat, I need your help with something urgent and highly confidential. What's going on? I gave her a condensed version of the situation, keeping my voice low and professional. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. Jesus, Isabella. Your own brother? I know. Pat, I need advice on protecting myself and Dad legally. I'm cooperating with the FBI investigation, but I want to make sure we're covered on all fronts. Smart. First, we need to secure your father's remaining assets immediately. If Derek has been stealing for months, he might have access to other accounts or financial instruments. Second, we should explore civil recovery options parallel to the criminal case. Third, you need to document everything, every conversation, every interaction with Derek from this point forward. The FBI wants me to maintain normal contact until they arrest him tomorrow. Then you do exactly that, but carefully. Don't give him any indication you know about the theft. Don't ask leading questions that could be construed as obstruction. Just be normal. Normal. As if anything about this situation could ever be normal again. Pat, there's something else. Derek's been subtly suggesting that Dad might be mentally declining, that he could have made these transfers himself and forgotten. I think he's planning to claim Dad authorized the withdrawals. Anticipated that. That's why your testimony will be crucial. You know your father's mental state better than anyone, and your professional background gives you credibility. Derek's going to need more than suggestions to build a dementia defense. After hanging up with Patricia, I stood in that hospital corridor, looking out at the city through tall windows. Somewhere out there, Derek's stolen money was sitting in accounts he'd opened using fake companies and false premises. Meanwhile, Dad lay unconscious 3 floors above me, unaware that his younger son had just destroyed the financial security he'd spent his life building. But Derek had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd assumed I was still the same person who'd always covered for him, always smoothed over his mistakes, always chosen family harmony over inconvenient truths. That person was gone. In her place was someone who understood that real family loyalty meant protecting the innocent from the guilty, not protecting criminals from consequences. Derek thought he'd exploited a perfect moment of family crisis to commit the perfect crime. Tomorrow morning, he'd learn that there are no perfect crimes, only imperfect criminals who underestimate the people they betray. I walked back toward the waiting area, mentally preparing for one more day of pretending I didn't know what my brother really was. One more day of lies and performance and family charades. But unlike Derek's deception, mine served justice. And justice, I'd learned in 7 years of prosecuting financial criminals, was always worth the wait. The evening shift brought different nurses, softer lighting, and the kind of hospital quiet that makes every beep and whisper seem amplified. Derek had finally gone home around dinner time, claiming exhaustion but probably more concerned about avoiding any more questions about his whereabouts. I'd encouraged him to rest, playing the supportive sister role while mentally counting down the hours until his arrest. Alone in the waiting area, I opened my laptop and began the work that would either save our family's finances or confirm just how much Derek had managed to steal. 7 years of forensic accounting had taught me that financial criminals always leave trails. The question was whether those trails led to recovery or just deeper into the maze of hidden assets. I started with Dad's business records, cross-referencing every transaction Derek had handled over the past 6 months with legitimate business expenses. The pattern emerged quickly: real invoices paid twice, fake vendor payments to companies that didn't exist, consulting fees to shell corporations, and equipment purchases that never appeared in our inventory. Derek hadn't just stolen the $870,000 yesterday. He'd been systematically embezzling for months, using increasingly sophisticated methods as he gained confidence. The bank had caught $180,000 in irregular withdrawals, but my analysis showed the actual theft was closer to $300,000 over 6 months, not including yesterday's massive transfer. My phone rang, interrupting my calculations. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code as local. Isabella Reeves? Yes. This is Dr. Harrison from Mercy General's Financial Counseling Department. I'm calling about your father's account. We've had some unusual activity that requires immediate attention. My stomach dropped. What kind of activity? Someone called this afternoon claiming to be Robert Reeves' son, requesting information about payment plans for upcoming medical expenses. The caller provided correct personal information and account numbers, but our verification protocols flagged some inconsistencies. Derek. Even while his fraud investigation was heating up, he was still working angles, probably trying to figure out how much Dad's medical bills would total and whether there were other accounts he could access. Dr. Harrison, my father is unconscious in your ICU. He couldn't have authorized anyone to make inquiries about his account. That's what concerned us. The caller became agitated when we asked for written authorization, claiming it was a family emergency and demanding immediate information about account balances and insurance coverage. Can you tell me what information was requested specifically? Payment schedules, insurance limits, whether there were secondary accounts linked for automatic payments, and potential costs for extended care facilities if Mr. Reeves required long-term treatment. Derek was calculating Dad's medical expenses against remaining assets, probably trying to determine how much money would be left after treatment costs. The casual cruelty of it was staggering. He'd stolen our father's money, then called to figure out whether Dad would have enough left to pay for his own medical care. Dr. Harrison, I need to inform you that there's an ongoing FBI investigation into unauthorized access to my father's financial accounts. The person who called you is likely the subject of that investigation. Oh my. Should we contact the authorities? I'll handle that. For now, please flag Mr. Reeves' account for maximum security. No information should be released to anyone except me, and only with proper written authorization and ID verification. After hanging up, I immediately called Agent Martinez. She answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the late hour. Agent Martinez, Derek contacted the hospital's financial department today, fishing for information about Dad's medical expenses and account details. While he's under investigation for stealing from those same accounts? Apparently he's not content with what he's already taken. He wanted to know about insurance limits, long-term care costs, secondary accounts, basically conducting reconnaissance for either additional theft or covering his tracks. This actually helps our case. Shows ongoing criminal intent rather than a single impulsive act. Did the hospital record the conversation? I'll find out. Agent Martinez, I've been analyzing Dad's business records. The theft is more extensive than the bank initially detected. I'm seeing evidence of systematic embezzlement going back 6 months, possibly longer. How much total? At least $1.2 million including yesterday's transfers. Derek's been using fake invoices, double payments, and shell company transactions to siphon money gradually before yesterday's major theft. Agent Martinez was quiet for a moment. Isabella, that changes the scope of our case significantly. We're no longer looking at opportunistic theft during a family crisis. This is organized, long-term financial fraud with multiple federal violations. There's more. I found evidence that Derek established credit lines using Dad's business as collateral. If those loans default, we could lose the commercial properties too. Jesus. He was planning to strip everything. The enormity of Derek's betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't just about the money he'd stolen. He'd been systematically destroying Dad's entire business empire, setting up defaults and seizures that would have taken everything our family had built over decades. Agent Martinez, I need to ask about asset protection. Can we freeze Derek's personal accounts before he moves more money offshore? Already in process. We've got court orders for all accounts associated with Derek and his shell companies. But I need to warn you, some of the offshore transfers may be irreversible. How much are we talking about? Potentially $400,000 to $500,000. The Cayman account was just the first stop. Our international cooperation requests show additional transfers to Swiss and Singapore banks within hours of the initial theft. I closed my laptop, feeling the weight of what Derek had accomplished in less than 24 hours. While our family was focused on Dad's survival, Derek had executed a sophisticated international money laundering scheme that could permanently destroy our financial security. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. How's Dad doing? Sorry I left early, was feeling really overwhelmed. We'll be back first thing tomorrow. I stared at the message, marveling at his ability to maintain the concerned brother act even while actively investigating ways to steal more money. Derek's performance was flawless, just the right amount of vulnerability mixed with family concern. I typed back, Dad's stable. Get some rest. Tomorrow might be a long day. It was true, though not in the way Derek expected. Tomorrow, federal agents would arrest him at the hospital, probably in front of medical staff and other families dealing with their own crises. The irony was perfect. Derek would be taken into custody at the same place where Dad was fighting to recover from the stress and trauma that Derek had helped create. But as I prepared to spend another night in the hospital, I realized something had shifted inside me. The anger was still there, along with the grief and betrayal, but there was something else now. A cold, professional satisfaction that came from watching a complex case come together. Derek thought he was smarter than everyone else, that his charm and manipulation could overcome any obstacle. He'd spent months planning what he believed was the perfect financial crime, exploiting family trust and medical crisis for maximum impact. What he hadn't counted on was that his sister wasn't just a family member who'd been betrayed. She was a forensic accountant who'd spent 7 years putting people like him in federal prison. And unlike his victims in the past, our trusting father, our conflict-avoiding mother, our harmony-obsessed extended family, I knew exactly how to build an airtight case. Derek had always been good at reading people and telling them what they wanted to hear. But he'd never learned to read evidence, follow money trails, or understand the federal justice system. Tomorrow morning, his education would begin. I pulled up the FBI's financial crimes database on my laptop and began documenting every piece of evidence I'd uncovered. Transaction records, false invoices, shell company registrations, phone records, timeline analysis, everything federal prosecutors would need to ensure Derek faced the maximum consequences for his crimes. Derek thought he'd destroyed our family's financial future. Instead, he'd just handed me the tools to destroy his freedom. And unlike the money he'd stolen, justice wasn't something that could be hidden in offshore accounts or shell companies. Justice was coming home tomorrow morning. Derek arrived at the hospital the next morning at 8:30 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and pastries from the expensive bakery downtown, the same one he'd been frequenting since his mysterious salary increase 6 months ago. He walked into the waiting area with that practiced expression of concern, perfectly calibrated to convey just the right amount of worry without appearing overly dramatic. Morning, Izzy. Any updates on Dad? He handed me a coffee, and I noticed his hands were steady. No trembling, no nervous energy. Either Derek was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely believed he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. They might try reducing his sedation this afternoon. I accepted the coffee, noting the $6 price tag still stuck to the cup. Even now, Derek was flaunting his unexplained wealth, buying expensive treats with stolen money while Dad lay unconscious from the stress Derek had helped create. That's great news. Derek settled into the chair beside me, pulling out his phone. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about the bank investigation. Should I be worried? I mean, I know I didn't do anything wrong, but these things can get complicated. The question was perfectly crafted, concerned but not panicked, seeking information while appearing cooperative. Derek was fishing, trying to determine how much I knew and whether he needed to accelerate his escape plans. The bank is being thorough, I said carefully. They're treating it as a serious fraud investigation. FBI involvement, international cooperation requests, the full scope. Derek's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. FBI? Isn't that a bit much for a bank error? It's not a bank error, Derek. Someone stole $870,000 from Dad's account while he was in surgery. That's federal wire fraud, especially with the international transfers involved. International transfers? Derek's voice climbed slightly higher. What do you mean? I watched his face carefully, noting the micro-expressions he couldn't quite control. The money was moved through multiple accounts, including offshore banks. Very sophisticated operation, according to the agents. Derek set down his coffee with deliberate care. Agents? You talked to FBI agents? Agent Martinez from the Financial Crimes Unit. She's been very helpful in explaining the scope of the investigation. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages. They're planning arrests soon. Apparently they have solid evidence, security footage, electronic records, documentation of the shell companies used in the money laundering. The color drained from Derek's face, but he tried to maintain his composure. Shell companies? This sounds like organized crime stuff. That's what I thought too. But Agent Martinez explained that even individual criminals use sophisticated methods now. Fake corporations, offshore accounts, structured transactions to avoid detection. She said whoever did this had been planning it for months. Derek's breathing became slightly more rapid. Months? The investigation found evidence of systematic theft going back at least 6 months. Small amounts at first, then escalating to yesterday's major theft. I looked directly at Derek. Agent Martinez said the pattern suggests someone with intimate knowledge of Dad's business, someone who understood his routines and vulnerabilities. That's terrible. Someone Dad trusted. The irony of Derek expressing outrage at his own crimes was almost surreal. But I could see the calculation behind his eyes, probably trying to figure out how much evidence existed and whether he could still talk his way out of consequences. Derek, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Your new apartment, the car, all the nice clothes, how have you been affording all that? I know Dad gave you a raise, but this seems like a significant lifestyle upgrade. Derek's hand went to his neck, that nervous gesture I'd noticed yesterday. I've been doing well with some investments. Cryptocurrency, some stock picks. You know how volatile those markets can be. When you hit it right, you can make serious money. That's amazing. Which cryptocurrencies? I've been thinking about diversifying my portfolio. Oh, you know, the usual ones. Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of the smaller coins. Derek's answer was vague, generic, the kind of nonspecific response someone gives when they're lying about something they don't actually understand. Could you recommend a trading platform? I'd love to see your portfolio strategy. Derek's eyes darted away. I use several different platforms. It's pretty complicated, lots of technical analysis. Maybe we could discuss it after Dad's situation is resolved. Another deflection. Derek was good at changing subjects when pressed for details, but his tells were becoming more obvious. The neck touching, the eye movement, the way his voice got slightly higher when he was improvising lies. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez, team in position. Arrest in 10 minutes. Maintain normal conversation. Derek, the FBI wants to interview everyone with account access today. They said it's routine for this type of investigation, just background and timeline verification. Today? Derek's voice cracked slightly. Agent Martinez should be here soon, actually. She wants to talk to both of us, get our perspectives on Dad's business operations and anyone who might have had unauthorized access. Derek stood up abruptly. I should probably call my lawyer first. Not that I have anything to hide, but you know how these things can get twisted. That's smart. Though Agent Martinez said the interviews are just preliminary, not formal interrogations. She seemed most interested in the timeline of yesterday's events and our observations about Dad's account security. Right. Still, better safe than sorry. Derek was pacing now, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Izzy, if something happens to me, if I get caught up in this investigation somehow, I want you to know that I love Dad and I would never do anything to hurt him. The words hit like a physical blow. Derek was essentially confessing while trying to maintain plausible deniability. He was preparing me for his arrest while still pretending innocence. Nothing's going to happen to you if you didn't do anything wrong, I said evenly. Of course. It's just, these federal investigations can be overwhelming. Sometimes innocent people get caught up in things they don't understand. I saw Agent Martinez and 2 other agents walking through the hospital lobby, heading toward the elevators. Derek's back was to them, but I could see the determination in their stride. Derek, there's something I need to tell you. He turned toward me, and I could see real fear in his eyes now. What? I know what you did. I know about the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the months of systematic theft. I know you used my recommendation to gain Dad's trust and access to his money. I know you've been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity. Derek's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, calculation, and finally, a kind of resigned anger. How long have you known? Since yesterday morning, when the bank called. Agent Martinez showed me everything: the security footage, the transaction records, the false companies you created. All of it. You've been lying to me this whole time. I've been doing my job. Protecting Dad and helping law enforcement build a case against the person who stole from him while he was fighting for his life. Derek looked toward the elevators, probably sensing something was wrong even before he saw the agents approaching. Izzy, you don't understand. I needed that money. There were debts, people who would have hurt me if I didn't pay them back. I was going to return it, I swear. You moved $400,000 to untraceable offshore accounts, Derek. That's not borrowing, that's stealing. Agent Martinez and her team entered the waiting area, their federal credentials clearly visible. Derek saw them and his shoulders sagged, the last of his confident facade finally crumbling. Derek Reeves? Agent Martinez's voice was calm but authoritative. Yes. You're under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and theft from an elderly victim. You have the right to remain silent. As the agents read Derek his rights, other families in the waiting area watched in shocked silence. A few people recognized what was happening and moved their children away from the scene. The surreal normalcy of hospital life continued around us, nurses walking their rounds, visitors carrying flowers, the distant sound of medical equipment, while Derek's criminal empire collapsed in handcuffs. Derek looked at me one last time before they led him away. I hope you're happy, Izzy. You destroyed our family for money. No, Derek, I said quietly. You destroyed our family when you decided to steal from Dad while he was dying. I just made sure there were consequences. As Derek was escorted toward the elevators, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a profound sadness for the brother I'd thought I knew. That person had probably never existed at all, just another one of Derek's carefully constructed performances. But alongside the sadness was something stronger: relief. The lies were over, the pretending was finished, and Derek could finally face the consequences of his choices without hiding behind family loyalty or emotional manipulation. The waiting area slowly returned to normal, families resuming their quiet conversations and worried vigils. I sat back down in my plastic chair, alone for the first time in days, and felt the weight of what had just happened. Derek was gone, probably forever. But Dad was still alive, still fighting, and now he had a chance to recover without the additional stress of financial ruin hanging over his treatment. Justice wasn't always satisfying, but it was always necessary. And Derek had just learned that there are some betrayals too serious for family forgiveness to overcome. The silence in the waiting room after Derek's arrest was deafening. Other families who had witnessed the scene kept glancing my way with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy, probably wondering what kind of crime warranted federal agents in a hospital ICU waiting area. I sat there for several minutes, processing the reality that my brother was now in federal custody, before my phone started ringing. The first call came from my mother. Isabella Reeves, what in God's name is happening? Mrs. Patterson from down the street just called saying she saw Derek being arrested on the morning news. Tell me this is some kind of mistake. I took a deep breath, preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. Mom, Derek stole $870,000 from Dad's business account yesterday while Dad was in surgery. The FBI arrested him this morning. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Mom's voice came back, shaky and disbelieving. That's impossible. Derek would never, you must be mistaken. There has to be an explanation. Mom, I've seen the evidence. Security footage, bank records, the shell companies he created to hide the money. He's been systematically stealing from Dad for months. No. Her voice was firm, almost angry. I don't believe it. Derek is a good boy, he's always been good to this family. If money is missing, there has to be another explanation. The denial was immediate and absolute, exactly what I'd expected but still painful to hear. Mom, the FBI doesn't arrest people based on mistakes. They have comprehensive evidence of federal wire fraud and money laundering. Well then someone planted that evidence. Someone is framing Derek, and I can't believe his own sister isn't defending him. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of family dynamics that had protected Derek from consequences his entire life. Mom, I was there when the bank called. I worked with the FBI to build the case. Derek confessed to me just before his arrest. He what? He admitted he needed the money for debts, claimed he was going to pay it back. Mom, he stole from Dad while Dad was unconscious in surgery. How can you defend that? Because he's my son. The words came out like a scream, raw and desperate. Just like you're my daughter, and I can't understand how you could betray your own brother like this. The accusation hit exactly where it was intended to. Mom wasn't angry at Derek for stealing, she was angry at me for catching him. In her mind, I was the traitor for refusing to protect Derek from the consequences of his crimes. Mom, Derek betrayed Dad. He betrayed all of us. I didn't betray anyone, I protected Dad from a criminal who happened to be related to us. Don't you dare call your brother a criminal. Derek made a mistake, maybe got in over his head with some bad people, but that doesn't make him a criminal. Stealing $1 million makes him a criminal, Mom. The relationship doesn't change the crime. $1 million? I thought you said $870,000. Even in her denial and anger, Mom had caught the discrepancy. The investigation found evidence of additional thefts going back months. Derek has been embezzling from Dad's business systematically. I don't believe any of this. Derek loves his father. He would never hurt Dad. Derek nearly bankrupted Dad while Dad was fighting for his life. If that's not hurting him, what is? Mom hung up without another word. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with calls from relatives who'd apparently heard some version of the story. Aunt Rachel, Uncle Tom, cousins I barely spoke to, all of them demanding explanations, expressing disbelief, and asking how I could do this to Derek. The family's reaction was swift and predictable. Derek was the victim of overzealous law enforcement. Derek was being railroaded by a vindictive banking system. Derek was the target of false accusations. Anyone except Derek was responsible for Derek's crimes. My cousin Jennifer's call was particularly painful. Izzy, I can't believe you're cooperating with the FBI against your own brother. Families are supposed to stick together, especially during crises. Derek obviously made some mistakes, but involving law enforcement? That's just cruel. Jennifer, Derek committed federal crimes. This isn't about family loyalty, it's about justice. Justice? Derek is sitting in a federal holding cell right now because his sister chose strangers over family. How is that justice? Derek is in a holding cell because he stole nearly $1 million from our hospitalized father. I didn't put him there, his choices did. You could have handled this privately, worked something out within the family. Instead, you destroyed Derek's entire future over money. The conversation continued in circles, with Jennifer and others treating Derek's crimes as family problems that should have been resolved through internal discussion rather than legal consequences. The idea that stealing from family might actually be worse than stealing from strangers seemed incomprehensible to them. By afternoon, I'd received similar calls from a dozen relatives, all expressing variations of the same theme. I was the real villain for refusing to protect Derek from his own actions. The family had closed ranks around Derek not because they believed he was innocent, but because they believed family loyalty trumped legal and ethical obligations. My father's business partner, Marcus Webb, called around 3 p.m. with a different perspective. Isabella, I just heard about Derek. I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised. What do you mean? There have been some irregularities I've noticed over the past few months. Invoices that didn't quite add up, payments to vendors I'd never heard of, expense reports that seemed inflated. I mentioned it to your father a few times, but he trusted Derek completely. Why didn't you investigate further? Marcus sighed. Because it was family business, literally. I didn't feel it was my place to question your father's son, especially when Robert seemed so proud of Derek's growing responsibility. What kind of irregularities are we talking about? Consulting fees to companies that didn't seem to exist, equipment purchases that never appeared in inventory, duplicate payments to legitimate vendors. I estimate maybe $50,000 to $75,000 over 6 months, but I only saw a fraction of the total transactions. So Derek's theft was even more extensive than the FBI had initially discovered. He'd been stealing from multiple revenue streams, using various methods to avoid detection while gradually increasing the amounts as he gained confidence. Marcus, would you be willing to testify about what you observed? Absolutely. Your father deserves justice, and Derek needs to face consequences for what he's done. I'm sorry it's family, Isabella, but crime is crime regardless of relationships. Marcus was the first person all day to express that view, that Derek's crimes were serious regardless of family connections, that stealing from relatives was actually worse than stealing from strangers because of the trust involved. That evening, I finally had a chance to sit with Dad during visiting hours. He was still unconscious, but the doctors were optimistic about gradually reducing his sedation. I held his hand and tried to figure out how to explain everything that had happened. Dad, Derek's in jail. He stole your money while you were in surgery, and he's been stealing from the business for months. The words felt strange spoken aloud in the quiet ICU room. I know you trusted him. I know you believed in him. But he betrayed that trust, and he betrayed you. Dad's breathing was steady, the monitors showing stable vital signs. He looked older somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen him. I had to choose between protecting Derek and protecting you. I chose you, Dad. I chose justice over family harmony, truth over comfortable lies. I squeezed his hand gently. The family is angry at me for cooperating with the FBI, but I'd make the same choice again. Some things are more important than family loyalty. A nurse came in to check Dad's medications, and I realized I'd been sitting there for hours, holding his hand and processing the day's events. Derek was in federal custody, facing decades in prison. The family had essentially disowned me for refusing to protect him. Dad's money was partially gone, possibly forever. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt peace. Not happiness, the situation was too tragic for that, but a deep sense of doing the right thing regardless of the cost. Derek's arrest wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a legal process that would probably take years to fully resolve. There would be trials, testimony, media coverage, and continued family drama. But the lies were over. The pretending was finished. Derek could no longer hide behind charm and manipulation, and I no longer had to pretend that family loyalty meant protecting criminals from consequences. Truth was often painful, but it was always better than comfortable deception. And truth, unlike stolen money, couldn't be hidden in offshore accounts or shell companies. Truth always came home eventually. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, 3 days after Derek's arrest. I sat in the federal courthouse gallery, watching my brother stand before Judge Catherine Morrison in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking nothing like the confident charmer who'd manipulated our family for years. The transformation was stark. Gone was the expensive clothing, the practiced smile, the casual arrogance that had masked his criminal activities. Derek's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender named James Morton, had clearly been briefed on the case's complexity. The charges were read aloud: wire fraud, money laundering, theft from an elderly victim, structuring financial transactions to avoid reporting requirements, and conspiracy to commit international money laundering. Each count carried potential sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years in federal prison. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Morrison asked. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor," Morton replied, though even he sounded unconvinced. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chin, stood to address bail. "Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of international money laundering, has already moved substantial funds offshore, and poses a significant flight risk. The government requests remand without bail." Morton argued for house arrest with electronic monitoring, claiming Derek had ties to the community and no prior criminal history. But Agent Martinez's testimony about the offshore accounts and Derek's attempts to access additional funds even after his father's hospitalization painted a picture of someone who would absolutely flee if given the opportunity. Bail denied, Judge Morrison ruled. The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. Derek turned to look at the gallery for the first time, his eyes finding mine. The expression on his face was a mixture of hurt, anger, and something that might have been pleading. He mouthed the word "please," though I wasn't sure what he was asking for. Forgiveness? Help with legal fees? A character witness statement? I looked back at him steadily, without expression, and watched his face crumble as he realized I wasn't going to save him this time. The bailiff led him away, and I felt a strange combination of relief and grief. Relief that Derek couldn't manipulate or harm anyone else, grief for the brother I'd thought I knew but who had apparently never existed. Outside the courthouse, I was ambushed by family members who'd driven down for the hearing. Mom, Aunt Rachel, Uncle Tom, and several cousins formed a semicircle around me on the courthouse steps, their faces unified in anger and disapproval. "I hope you're proud of yourself," Mom said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Your brother is sitting in a jail cell because you chose strangers over family. Derek is in jail because he committed federal crimes, Mom. The relationship doesn't change that reality." "Reality?" Aunt Rachel stepped forward, her face flushed with indignation. "The reality is that you collaborated with the FBI to destroy your own brother. You fed them information, helped them build their case, participated in his arrest." "I helped them build a case against a criminal who stole from our family," I replied calmly. "The fact that the criminal was Derek doesn't make the crimes any less serious." Uncle Tom, who'd always been Derek's favorite relative, looked at me with undisguised disgust. "You know what Derek told us? He said he was in trouble with some dangerous people, that he took the money to protect himself and was planning to pay it back. Instead of helping him figure out a solution, you called the FBI. Derek told you he was being threatened?" I asked, genuinely curious about this new version of events. "He borrowed money from the wrong people for some investments that went bad," Mom explained. "When they threatened him, he panicked and took money from your father's account. It was supposed to be temporary." The story was beautifully crafted, Derek as victim rather than predator, the theft reframed as desperate self-protection rather than calculated greed. It explained everything while excusing everything, giving the family a narrative they could accept. "Mom, Derek created shell companies and offshore accounts months before Dad's heart attack. He'd been systematically stealing from the business for half a year. That's not panic borrowing, that's organized fraud." "You don't know that for certain," Aunt Rachel insisted. "That's just what the FBI told you, and they have their own agenda. I've seen the evidence myself. Bank records, corporate filings, transaction timelines. Derek has been planning this for months. Even if that's true, Uncle Tom said, family doesn't turn family over to law enforcement. You handle these things privately, work out payment plans, give people a chance to make things right. How do you work out payment plans for money hidden in untraceable offshore accounts? I asked. How do you privately resolve international money laundering? The family exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the scope of Derek's crimes but unwilling to abandon their narrative of family loyalty over legal obligations. My cousin Jennifer, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke up. Isabella, even if Derek did everything they're saying, you could have refused to cooperate. You could have made the FBI prove their case without family testimony. And let Derek get away with destroying Dad's life savings? Dad would have forgiven Derek eventually, Mom said firmly. Your father believes in redemption, in giving people second chances. You took that choice away from him. Dad was unconscious when Derek stole the money, Mom. Derek didn't give Dad any choices at all. Your father is awake now, she replied. Have you asked him what he wants? Have you told him his son is in federal prison because his daughter chose prosecution over forgiveness? The question hit harder than I'd expected. Dad had regained consciousness yesterday, and while I'd visited him several times, I hadn't yet explained Derek's arrest or my role in the investigation. I'd been waiting for him to get stronger, but maybe I was just avoiding a conversation I didn't want to have. Dad's still recovering from major heart surgery, I said. He doesn't need additional stress right now. But he does need to know that his family is falling apart while he's lying in a hospital bed, Aunt Rachel said sharply. He needs to know that one son is in prison and his daughter is the reason why. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Our family was indeed falling apart, and my choices had accelerated that process. But the alternative, protecting Derek from consequences while he continued stealing, would have been worse. I won't apologize for doing the right thing, I said finally. Derek committed serious crimes against Dad and our family. Justice isn't negotiable based on relationships. Justice? Mom's voice rose. Justice would be helping Derek make this right, not destroying his life over money. Derek destroyed his own life when he chose to steal from his hospitalized father. I just made sure there were consequences. The conversation continued in circles for another 20 minutes, with family members taking turns expressing their disappointment and anger. They'd already decided I was the villain in this story, and no amount of evidence or reasoning was going to change that narrative. When I finally walked away from the courthouse steps, I realized I'd lost more than just Derek. I'd lost most of my extended family, who'd chosen to support a criminal rather than acknowledge uncomfortable truths about someone they loved. The drive back to the hospital gave me time to process what had just happened. Derek was in federal custody facing decades in prison. The family had essentially disowned me for refusing to protect him. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were probably gone forever, hidden in accounts that might never be recovered. But as I parked in the hospital garage and walked toward Dad's room, I felt something I hadn't expected: clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of Derek's lies, our family's denial, or the exhausting effort of maintaining peace at the expense of truth. Derek's crimes were no longer hidden. The family's dysfunction was no longer my responsibility to manage. The pretending was over, and while the truth was painful, it was also liberating. I was about to find out whether Dad would see it the same way. Dad was sitting up in bed when I entered his room, the first time I'd seen him fully conscious since the heart attack. The color had returned to his face, and while he still looked frail, his eyes were alert and focused. He was reading a newspaper, probably catching up on the world he'd missed during his medical crisis. Isabella, he said, setting down the paper and reaching for my hand. The nurses tell me you've barely left the hospital since my surgery. You should be taking care of yourself too. I sat in the chair beside his bed, suddenly unsure how to begin the conversation I'd been dreading. Dad, there are some things we need to discuss. About the business, about Derek, about what happened while you were unconscious. His expression grew serious. Derek hasn't been to visit me since I woke up. The nurses said he was here during the surgery, but I haven't seen him since. Is he all right? The question was loaded with so many assumptions. That Derek was fine, that Derek cared enough to visit, that Derek's absence was somehow unusual rather than the result of federal incarceration. I took a deep breath and decided on complete honesty. Dad, Derek is in federal prison. He was arrested 3 days ago for stealing $870,000 from your business account while you were in surgery. The words hung in the air between us. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like resignation rather than surprise. Tell me everything, he said quietly. I walked him through the entire timeline: the bank's fraud alert, my cooperation with the FBI investigation, the discovery of Derek's systematic embezzlement over months, the shell companies and offshore accounts, the arrest at the hospital. Dad listened without interrupting, his face growing more grave with each detail. How much total? He asked when I finished. At least $1.2 million, possibly more. The FBI is still tracing transactions through various accounts. Some of the offshore money may be permanently lost. Dad closed his eyes, and for a moment I worried the stress might trigger another cardiac event. But when he opened them again, his expression was calm, almost peaceful. I'm not surprised, he said finally. What do you mean? Isabella, I've suspected Derek was stealing from the business for months. Small amounts at first, then larger discrepancies that he always explained away with complicated stories about market fluctuations or delayed payments. I stared at him in shock. You knew? I suspected. But every time I questioned Derek directly, he had explanations that sounded plausible. And when I asked you about the financial management, you always vouched for his responsibility and competence. The guilt hit like a physical blow. Dad, I had no idea he was stealing. If I'd known. I know you didn't know. But Derek used your reputation and my trust in your judgment to deflect my concerns. Every time I worried about irregularities, Derek would point out that you'd recommended him for financial oversight and that you hadn't raised any red flags. Why didn't you investigate further? Dad sighed deeply, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Because he's my son, and I wanted to believe the best about him. Because confronting the truth would have meant acknowledging that I'd raised someone capable of stealing from his own family. Dad, Derek's choices aren't a reflection of your parenting. Aren't they? His voice was bitter. I've been thinking about this since I woke up, Isabella. All the times I bailed Derek out of trouble, all the consequences I helped him avoid, all the excuses I made for his behavior. I taught him that charm and manipulation could overcome accountability. You were being a loving father. I was being an enabling father. There's a difference. Dad reached for a glass of water, his hands slightly shaky. When Derek was 16 and crashed my car while drinking, I told the insurance company it was mechanical failure. When he forged my signature on checks in college, I covered the losses and called it a misunderstanding. When he quit 3 jobs in 2 years because of personality conflicts with supervisors, I hired him rather than let him face unemployment. The pattern was clear when laid out like that: a lifetime of protecting Derek from consequences, teaching him that family relationships could shield him from accountability. I created the person who stole from me while I was dying, Dad continued. Derek learned that no matter what he did, family loyalty would protect him from real consequences. Dad, that's not your fault. Derek made his own choices. But I gave him the foundation for those choices. I taught him that love meant avoiding accountability, that family meant never facing the full consequences of your actions. We sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of that realization. Finally, Dad spoke again. The family is angry at you for cooperating with the FBI. How do you know? Your mother called this morning. She's furious that you've betrayed Derek, that you chose law enforcement over family loyalty. Dad's voice carried a note of irony. She wants me to ask you to withdraw your cooperation, maybe hire Derek a private attorney, work out some kind of family settlement. What did you tell her? I told her that you did exactly what I would have wanted you to do if I'd been conscious to make the decision myself. Relief flooded through me. Really? Isabella, Derek stole from me while I was fighting for my life. He exploited my medical crisis to commit federal crimes against our family's financial security. The relationship doesn't excuse the crime, it makes it worse. Mom thinks family should protect family, regardless of the circumstances. Your mother thinks love means avoiding accountability. But real love, the kind that actually helps people, sometimes means letting them face consequences. Dad squeezed my hand. Derek needed to be stopped, not protected. You did the right thing. The family doesn't see it that way. The family has been enabling Derek for decades, just like I did. They're angry at you because you held up a mirror to their own complicity. Dad's words crystallized something I'd been struggling to understand. The family's anger wasn't really about my cooperation with law enforcement, it was about my refusal to continue a pattern of protecting Derek from accountability that everyone had participated in for years. Dad, there's something else. Derek contacted the hospital's financial department during the investigation, trying to get information about your medical expenses and insurance coverage. Dad's jaw tightened. While he was under investigation for stealing my money? He wanted to know about payment schedules, long-term care costs, whether there were secondary accounts he could access. Even after stealing nearly $1 million, he was still looking for more opportunities. Jesus Christ. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. He was calculating whether I'd have enough money left to pay for my own medical care. I'm sorry, Dad. I know this is painful. It's clarifying, actually. Any doubt I had about your decision to cooperate with law enforcement just disappeared. Dad looked toward the window, city lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Derek wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing my future, my security, my ability to pay for medical care if this heart condition worsens. The FBI recovered some of the domestic funds. Not everything, but maybe 60% of the total theft. And Derek? He pleaded not guilty, but the evidence is overwhelming. His attorney is probably going to push for a plea deal to avoid the maximum sentences. Dad nodded slowly. Good. Derek needs to face real consequences for the first time in his life. Maybe prison will teach him what decades of family enabling never could. Are you sure about this, Dad? Once Derek goes to trial, there's no going back. The family will never forgive either of us. Dad looked at me directly, his eyes clear and determined. Isabella, some things are more important than family harmony. Justice is one of them. Accountability is another. Derek made his choices, now he needs to live with them. And if the family cuts us off completely? Then we'll build a new kind of family, one based on honesty rather than enabling, truth rather than comfortable lies. Dad smiled for the first time since waking up. Besides, you and I have each other. And unlike Derek, we know the difference between love and manipulation. As visiting hours ended and I prepared to leave Dad's room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete alignment with my father about Derek's situation. No more divided loyalties, no more choosing between family peace and doing the right thing. Derek had forced us to choose between enabling and accountability. We'd chosen accountability, and while the cost was high, the alternative would have been much worse. Justice wasn't always comfortable, but it was always necessary. And Derek was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 6 months after Derek's arrest, I stood in the conference room of Morrison and Associates, the law firm handling Dad's civil recovery case against Derek's remaining assets. The criminal trial had concluded 3 weeks earlier with Derek accepting a plea deal, 12 years in federal prison in exchange for cooperation in recovering hidden funds. It wasn't the maximum sentence I'd hoped for, but it was substantial enough to ensure Derek would spend his 30s behind bars. The civil case was more complex. While the criminal prosecution focused on punishment, our civil action aimed at asset recovery and financial restoration. Dad's medical bills had exceeded $400,000, and his ongoing cardiac care would require expensive treatments for years to come. Every dollar we could recover from Derek's schemes was crucial to Dad's future security. Patricia Valdez, our attorney, spread the latest financial reports across the conference table. We've successfully frozen and recovered approximately $380,000 from Derek's domestic accounts and shell companies. The Delaware and Nevada accounts were fully seized, along with his personal assets, the car, apartment security deposits, and investment accounts. What about the offshore money? Dad asked. He'd been cleared for limited activities by his cardiologist and insisted on participating in all legal proceedings despite my concerns about stress. That's more complicated. The Cayman Islands account held $400,000, but Derek moved most of it to Swiss and Singapore banks within hours of the initial theft. We've recovered about $150,000 through international cooperation agreements, but the remaining $250,000 is likely gone permanently. The numbers were devastating but not unexpected. Derek had been surprisingly sophisticated in his money laundering operation, using financial instruments and jurisdictions specifically chosen to frustrate recovery efforts. So total recovery is around $530,000 out of $1.2 million stolen, I calculated. Plus Derek's cooperation led to the discovery of additional hidden assets, Patricia continued. We found a cryptocurrency wallet containing about $75,000 and a safe deposit box with $30,000 in cash and gold coins. Dad looked through the financial reports with the same methodical attention he'd once applied to real estate deals. What's our total recovery percentage? Approximately 53% of documented losses. It's actually better than average for complex international fraud cases. While 53% was significant, it still meant Dad had permanently lost nearly $500,000 to his own son's crimes. The insurance settlement from Derek's fraudulent business transactions added another $200,000, but Dad's financial position remained severely compromised compared to before the theft. There's something else we need to discuss, Patricia said, her tone becoming more serious. Derek's attorney has reached out about a family reconciliation meeting. Apparently Derek wants to apologize directly to both of you before beginning his prison sentence. Dad and I exchanged glances. What kind of meeting? I asked. Supervised conversation at the Federal Detention Center. Derek claims he wants to explain his actions and express remorse. His attorney suggests it might provide closure for everyone involved. Absolutely not, I said immediately. Derek had months to express remorse. He chose to maintain his innocence until the plea deal, and even then he only cooperated to reduce his sentence. Dad was quiet for a long moment. What do you think he really wants? Probably to manipulate us one more time, I replied. Derek's facing 12 years in federal prison. He's looking for any advantage he can find, maybe hoping for character witness statements if he appeals, or family support for early parole consideration. Patricia nodded. That's my assessment as well. Derek's cooperation in asset recovery was entirely self-serving. He got sentence reduction in exchange for information he should have provided voluntarily. This apology meeting feels like another manipulation attempt. Can Derek contact us directly from prison? Dad asked. Not without your consent. We can have all communication blocked if you prefer. Dad looked at me. What do you think, Isabella? I'd been anticipating this moment for months. Eventually, Derek would try to re-establish contact, probably using guilt and manipulation to work his way back into our good graces. The family had already begun their campaign. Mom had been leaving voicemails about forgiveness and second chances, while various relatives had sent letters suggesting we visit Derek in prison. I think Derek has said everything he needs to say through his criminal actions, I replied. Any apology now is strategic rather than sincere. I agree, Dad said firmly. Patricia, please inform Derek's attorney that we have no interest in a reconciliation meeting. Any future communication attempts should be blocked. Understood. There's one more issue we should address, the media attention. Derek's case attracted significant coverage because of the family betrayal angle and the international money laundering. Several news outlets have requested interviews. The media coverage had been intense and mostly accurate, though some stories sensationalized the family drama aspects. Headlines like, Son Steals from Dying Father, and Heart Attack Heist, Family Betrayal Leads to Federal Prison, had made our private tragedy into public entertainment. We've declined all interview requests, I said. We want this case to fade from public attention as quickly as possible. That's wise. However, there might be value in a controlled statement about financial fraud prevention, particularly regarding family-based crimes. You have unique expertise in forensic accounting, Isabella, and your perspective could help other families recognize warning signs. It was an interesting proposition. My experience with Derek's crimes had given me insights into how family dynamics can enable financial fraud, and how loyalty can be weaponized by sophisticated criminals. I'll consider it, I said. But only if we can focus on prevention and education rather than our specific case. After the meeting, Dad and I drove to his new apartment, a smaller place than the house he'd had to sell to cover medical expenses and replace stolen funds. The downsizing had been difficult emotionally, but Dad approached it with characteristic pragmatism. This is actually easier to maintain, he said as we sat in his simplified living room. Less space to heat, smaller mortgage payment, walking distance to the medical center. Dad, I'm sorry you had to sell the house. If Derek hadn't stolen that money. Isabella, stop. Derek's crimes aren't your responsibility, and neither are their consequences. Dad poured coffee from a pot that looked exactly like the one from his old kitchen. Besides, I'm learning that material possessions matter less than I thought. I nearly died 6 months ago. Having a smaller apartment doesn't change the fact that I'm alive and recovering. The family thinks we're both being too harsh about Derek. The family thinks we should pretend Derek's crimes never happened and welcome him back when he gets out of prison. Dad's voice carried an edge of frustration. Your mother called yesterday asking when we're going to move past this and forgive Derek for his mistakes. Mistakes. As if systematic embezzlement and international money laundering were accidents. That's exactly how they see it. Derek made some bad choices, but he's still family, so we should forgive and forget. Dad set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. But forgiveness without accountability isn't love, Isabella. It's enabling. Do you think we'll ever have a relationship with Derek again? Dad considered the question seriously. Maybe. But not the relationship we had before. And not until Derek demonstrates genuine change rather than strategic remorse. Real accountability, real understanding of how his actions affected others, real commitment to making amends. That could take years. It could take decades. Or it might never happen at all. Dad looked toward the window, where afternoon light filtered through blinds that had come with the apartment. But I'd rather have an honest relationship based on truth than a fake relationship based on pretending Derek's crimes never happened. That evening, I returned to my own apartment and found a letter from Derek waiting in my mailbox. Despite Patricia's instructions to block communication, someone had apparently hand-delivered it rather than sending it through official prison channels. I held the envelope for several minutes, weighing whether to open it or throw it away unopened. Finally, curiosity won, and I carefully opened the letter, half expecting manipulation disguised as remorse. The letter was surprisingly brief. Izzy, I know you probably won't read this, but I needed to try. I fucked up badly, worse than you know. The money thing was just the beginning. I've been lying to everyone about everything for years. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you did the right thing by turning me in. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have kept stealing until I destroyed everything Dad built. I hope someday you can be proud that you chose justice over family loyalty. I never would have been strong enough to make that choice. D. I read the letter twice, looking for hidden manipulation or strategic positioning, but it seemed genuinely different from Derek's usual communications. No requests for help, no attempts to minimize his crimes, no emotional manipulation designed to generate sympathy. Maybe Derek was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Or maybe this was just a more sophisticated manipulation attempt. Either way, it didn't change anything fundamental about our situation. Derek was in federal prison where he belonged. Dad was recovering physically and financially from his son's betrayal. Our family was permanently fractured along lines of accountability versus enabling. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching peace. Not happiness, the situation was too tragic for that, but the deep satisfaction that comes from doing the right thing regardless of personal cost. Justice had been served, consequences had been imposed, and truth had finally won out over comfortable lies. Derek's letter went into my shredder, along with any lingering doubt about the choices I'd made. 2 years after Derek's sentencing, I stood in the ballroom of the Marriott downtown, addressing an audience of 300 financial professionals, family business owners, and fraud prevention specialists. The annual conference on family financial crime, recognition, prevention, and recovery had become my unexpected calling, born from the hard-earned expertise of surviving Derek's betrayal. Family financial fraud is particularly devastating because it exploits the deepest forms of trust, I said, looking out at faces that reflected various stages of recognition and concern. The perpetrators aren't strangers who break into your accounts, they're people you've loved, trusted, and given access to your most vulnerable financial information. In the audience, I spotted several people I'd worked with over the past 18 months. Maria Santos, whose brother had embezzled $200,000 from their family restaurant. David Chin, whose daughter had systematically drained his retirement accounts while he was recovering from cancer. Jennifer Walsh, whose business partner and cousin had used shell companies remarkably similar to Derek's to steal from their construction company. Each case had taught me something new about the psychology of family fraud and the unique challenges of recovery when the criminal is someone you love. The warning signs are often subtle, I continued, advancing to the next slide showing Derek's financial behavior timeline. Lifestyle improvements that don't match known income, defensive reactions to financial questions, increasing control over family financial decisions, and sophisticated explanations for simple discrepancies. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Rachel Martinez, a forensic psychologist who'd become a collaborator on several family fraud cases. Isabella, your case study methodology is helping families recognize patterns they might otherwise rationalize away, she said. Have you considered formalizing this into a prevention program? Actually, yes. Dad and I have been discussing the creation of a nonprofit focused specifically on family financial crime education and victim support. It was true. Dad's recovery had been remarkable, both physically and emotionally. His cardiologist had cleared him for full activities 8 months ago, and he'd thrown himself into understanding financial fraud prevention with the same methodical intensity he'd once applied to real estate development. We're calling it the Reeves Foundation for Financial Family Safety, I explained. Dad wants to use his business experience and my forensic accounting background to help other families before they experience what we went through. That's powerful, turning your trauma into prevention for others. After the conference, I drove to Dad's apartment for our weekly dinner together. These meals had become sacred time for us, opportunities to process our ongoing recovery and plan our advocacy work. Dad was cooking when I arrived, something he'd taken up during his cardiac rehabilitation. How was the presentation? He asked, stirring a pot of something that smelled remarkably good for someone who'd learned to cook from YouTube videos. Good response. 3 families approached me afterward with questions about their own situations. One case sounds almost identical to Derek's, systematic theft by a trusted family member with increasing sophistication over time. Dad nodded grimly. It's more common than people want to admit. We've been fortunate to connect with other families going through similar situations. Speaking of which, I got a call from Agent Martinez today. Derek's up for his first parole review next year. Dad paused in his stirring. Already? Good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations. His attorney thinks he has a reasonable chance of early release after serving 4 years of his 12-year sentence. How do you feel about that? It was a question I'd been asking myself since Agent Martinez's call. 4 years seemed inadequate for the magnitude of Derek's crimes, but the federal system rewarded cooperation and rehabilitation efforts. Conflicted, I admitted. Part of me thinks 12 years wasn't enough to begin with. But another part recognizes that Derek has apparently made genuine efforts at rehabilitation. What kind of efforts? He completed a bachelor's degree in prison, earned certifications in accounting ethics, and has been working with a prison counselor on understanding the psychology of financial fraud. I sat down at Dad's small dining table. He's also been cooperating with the FBI on other family fraud cases, helping them understand criminal methodologies. Dad served dinner, chicken and vegetables that looked professional despite his amateur status. Cooperation is good, but it doesn't undo the damage. No, it doesn't. But Agent Martinez said Derek's insights have helped solve 3 other major family fraud cases. His cooperation led to the recovery of over $2 million in stolen funds for other families. So he's using his criminal expertise to help law enforcement. Apparently. And according to his counselor, Derek has developed genuine understanding of how his crimes affected us specifically and family fraud victims generally. Dad considered this while eating. Do you believe it's genuine? I don't know. Derek was always sophisticated at telling people what they wanted to hear. But the counselor seems convinced, and the FBI agents working with him say his cooperation has been substantive rather than superficial. And if he gets early release? He'll serve 3 years of supervised probation with strict financial monitoring. No access to family accounts, no involvement in any business requiring financial responsibility, and mandatory counseling. Would you be willing to see him? The question hung in the air between us. I'd been avoiding thinking about it directly, but Derek's potential early release made the possibility of renewed contact unavoidable. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me is curious whether he's genuinely changed. But another part thinks some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. What does your professional judgment tell you? I smiled at the question. Dad had learned to distinguish between my emotional reactions and my forensic accounting expertise, often asking me to apply professional analysis to our personal situation. Professionally? Derek exhibited sophisticated criminal planning and execution, followed by elaborate cover-up attempts. That level of deception suggests personality traits that don't typically change through incarceration alone. I paused, considering. But his cooperation with law enforcement and apparent commitment to rehabilitation are positive indicators. So you're not sure? I'm not sure. And maybe that uncertainty is the healthiest place to be right now. Dad nodded. I've been thinking about forgiveness lately. Not the kind the family keeps pushing, where we pretend nothing happened, but real forgiveness that acknowledges harm while releasing resentment. Have you forgiven Derek? I've forgiven the Derek I thought I knew, the son I raised, the person I believed existed before I understood his criminal capabilities. Dad set down his fork. But I haven't forgiven Derek the criminal, because he hasn't demonstrated sufficient understanding of or accountability for his crimes. What would that look like? Genuine remorse that focuses on our harm rather than his circumstances. Real understanding of how his actions affected our lives, our finances, our health, our family relationships. Meaningful steps toward restitution beyond what the courts required. That's a high standard. It should be. Derek didn't just steal money, he exploited my medical crisis, betrayed decades of trust, and forced us to choose between family loyalty and justice. Forgiveness for that level of betrayal requires more than good behavior in prison. Later that evening, I sat in my own apartment reviewing financial reports for the Reeves Foundation. We'd raised $150,000 in seed funding and were preparing to launch our first prevention seminars next month. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek's crimes had ultimately led to work that could prevent other families from experiencing similar betrayals. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Valdez. Derek's attorney submitted formal request for family meeting before parole hearing. Are you interested? I stared at the message for several minutes. Derek wanted to see Dad and me before his parole review, probably hoping family support would influence the decision. It was exactly the kind of strategic move Derek excelled at, positioning himself for maximum advantage while appearing to seek reconciliation. But maybe it was also genuine. Maybe 4 years in federal prison had actually changed Derek in fundamental ways. Maybe he developed real understanding of his crimes and their impact. I typed back, need time to think about it. We'll discuss with Dad and get back to you. The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to know whether Derek had genuinely changed. Our lives had found a new equilibrium without him. Dad's health was stable, our work was meaningful, our relationship had deepened through shared adversity. Derek's potential transformation was less relevant than our actual recovery. But perhaps that was exactly why meeting with him might be valuable. Not because I needed Derek's apology or explanation, but because I was finally strong enough to face him without being manipulated or hurt by whatever he might say. 4 years ago, Derek had forced me to choose between family loyalty and justice. I'd chosen justice, and it had cost me relationships with much of my extended family while teaching me the difference between love and enabling. Now Derek was presenting a different choice, between maintaining safe distance and risking renewed contact with someone who'd once devastated our lives. This time, I realized, I could choose without fear. Because unlike 4 years ago, I was no longer vulnerable to Derek's manipulation. I'd learned to prioritize truth over comfort, accountability over harmony, and justice over misplaced loyalty. Whatever Derek had become in prison, I'd become someone who couldn't be exploited through family obligations or emotional manipulation. The choice of whether to see Derek was mine to make freely, without pressure from guilt, family expectations, or false hopes for reconciliation. For the first time since Derek's crimes had shattered our family, I felt completely in control of my own decisions. And that control, I realized, was the most valuable thing Derek's betrayal had ultimately taught me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.